Okay, we are back live at the Bayou Retreats Game House with the Founders Podcast. Sign Esports, the Founders Podcast. I'm here. I'm Corey Tarver. I'm here with Eric and Dustin. Kind of the normal crew, the official crew. We had some guests pop in from time to time.
Normal crew might be a stretch.
Normal, maybe a stretch. Maybe not. Maybe normal is not the right word. But we are the crew. We've had some guests pop in. We're going to have some more guests pop in. First thing on the rundown to talk about is what I call the roadmap. Coming up in the next few weeks. Next week, we have Sam Hayes going to be joining us, our buddy Retro Reject. Next week, he's going to be here in the game house with us because Dustin's going to be back on the campaign, I think, right, next week. So probably with Sam here, with Eric and Sam, we'll probably talk a lot about gaming hardware and kind of maybe the evolution of, you know, how we went from arcades to 8-bit consoles and kind of just talk about the hardware because they're both hardware guys. Then after that, Matthew's going to join us. I think we got Matt coming in to talk about Overwatch and kind of its potential future here and with our local community, and then also kind of what maybe the future of Overwatch is around the world. That's going to be on the 3rd of June. Then on the 10th of June, we have kind of like a unique episode because I'm going to be out of town at some training. So we're going to do a full virtual remote episode. Our guests were very disappointed. They're like, oh, we don't get to come to the game house. Not that week. We're going to do a remote episode. We're all going to do it from Discord. You're going to have to be in the Discord to watch that episode live. It's going to be on the Sign Esports virtual stage in the Discord. So if you want to join us, plan on joining us there. We got for that one. We've got Bailey's coming. I think Soccer Master Bailey or something like that in the Discord. She's worked with us a lot on our social media presence and that kind of thing, and she's an esports scholarship recipient, which is really cool. We'll talk to her about that. She's also, I think, a pretty big Overwatch fan, but we'll talk to her about that a little bit. And then Lewis is going to join us, who has the Reef podcast, and he's also a Sign Esports veteran. So we'll visit with him a little bit about kind of his role in esports and his role with us, and also he can pitch his podcast a little bit, which is cool. We've been on that podcast and visited a little bit every once in a while. Ben Lafitte, our Halo HCS team coach, is going to join us and kind of give us an official update of what they've been doing. Those guys are playing hard. They keep getting really close to greatness. They got 4th in a tournament this week. So it's cool to keep up with them. So that's what's coming the next few weeks. Oh, look, I left off. That's on the 10th. On the 13th, we have a really interesting episode coming on the 13th. Dustin's going to love it. It's going to be music themed, video game music themed. Justin Martindale is going to be hopping on here with us, who I don't know that he's a big VGM guy, but he's a big video game player and a very talented musician. And so between him and Dustin and our special remote guest for that week, our buddy Brant, better known to the world as Professor Shy Guy, we're going to be talking about VGM that week. So that'll be fun. So we got a lot of fun coming up in the next few weeks. Just kind of want to lay out what's coming, and that's where we're going from here. Now, this episode, that's probably the most I'm going to talk this whole episode, because this episode is focused on the D-20 role-playing system games. And we'll talk about tabletop role-playing kind of as how it relates to the origin of those video games. But mostly, we're going to talk about the good old days and the yesterdays and the todays of D-20 role-playing inspired or D-20 role-playing based video games. So what I want to do to start off, I want y'all to kind of take us through the history of the whole kind of role-playing concept, the D-20, the dice-based, role-playing concept. Because Dustin, you've lived this like your whole life, basically. And Eric, you kind of lived it a little bit, kind of when we were growing up, maybe more so than I did. You lived it some then, but then maybe out, and then like in your adult life, you've gone back and lived it a whole lot more. And like I basically never lived it. I know a little bit about the memes and a little bit about the basic concept. I just haven't ever had time to get into it. So y'all take us back on the Wayback Machine to the good old starting days, I guess the late 70s, probably early 80s.
Well, the starting days were pre-us. So we were not alive for the beginning of tabletop role-playing. Well, tabletop role-playing is probably much older even than that. But D&D started in the late 70s.
Yeah, with Gygax. And then, so oddly enough, my brew buddy, her first system, and he's like 10 years younger than me, his first tabletop that he ever ran was first edition D&D. His friends' dads had played.
And he's 10 years younger than we are?
So that's kind of bizarre whenever he told me that. It was like, oh yeah, I never played second edition. I went straight from first to third with you guys. But anyway, so I started in second edition.
First edition is when they had basic and advanced. There's two different sections, wasn't it? Was that in first edition?
I actually don't even know.
Yeah, I think in basic, in first edition there was basic and there was advanced D&D, which advanced D&D is the way everything went now.
So I started with AD&D second edition, but what I played before that was Hero Quest and Dragon's Quest and a bunch of things that were spin-offs, sort of. Well, Hero Quest was actually made by Hasbro, and Craig Van later made HeroScape. But it was very similar in those days, so you wouldn't pick like a race and then a class. You played the elf, and the elf used a bow and did things, and they were kind of a spellcaster, and it was a lot more like
kind of like Gauntlet.
Kind of like more like playing Tower of Doom, which is second edition.
Like I said, Gauntlet. So I said Gauntlet. I used the Tower of Doom. Same thing. You pick the elf, pick the dwarf, pick the fighter, or whatever.
So in second edition, one of the really bad rules that and I don't even actually know if this is an official rule, but the way that we all played was you rolled your stats. You rolled 3d6 and you rolled them in order. And I know that was a really common thing. I don't know when they changed that, but I started playing third edition 15 years later with some buddies, and they were like, oh yeah, just roll your stats and distribute them wherever you want. I'm like, wait, I can do what? So third edition was huge for that, to not get in a character. Like, I really want to roll a mage, but...
And then you get 16 strength and 8 intelligence.
Yeah, so... And in fact, my very first character ever was named Wolf, and he had, like, a 7 in wisdom and a 6 in charisma, and, like, his high stat was a 14.
But the way you would do is you'd roll your stats, then you would pick whatever class you wanted to be?
Yeah.
Okay. So you could roll your stats, and I guess you figured out you were born a strong, dumb person.
Yeah.
Not going to be a wizard.
Yeah. Strong,
that makes sense.
Weak mind. But so one of the things that they've done since then is you can distribute your points however you want, whenever you roll them, and a lot of people play roll 4d6, drop the lowest. Some people even do re-roll ones. So getting more powerful characters is a lot easier, a lot better. It's a lot more likely to play the character that you want these days.
The Dungeons & Dragons D20 system is not the only kind of role-playing rules set. Is it pretty much the only one, or just the most common one, or are there other ones for different specialities?
It's definitely the most common one. So like even D&D and Pathfinder are very similar, but they're definitely different. There's very different rules, especially moving into 5th edition D&D. 5th edition D&D is very easy. We could pick it up, like we could roll characters and play right now and run a session with you having never actually played. We could not do that with Pathfinder. We couldn't even get through character creation with you in 10 minutes for Pathfinder. There's a game that is...
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Nope. There's another game...
You're not on this podcast, Siri.
There's another game called Fatal, which is like regarded as the worst role-playing system ever, and it's another D20 system. Shadowrun has its own system. It is super overcomplicated. Like it has rules for when you shoot a wall with a projectile, these are the angles that the explosion ricochets in.
Wow.
That's like, Shadowrun?
I believe it's Shadowrun.
One thing I was going to mention about, you said, is it the biggest one or the only one? It's not the only one. I think D&D or you know, the D&D track is probably the main one that has D20 as its core. So I know Warhammer, and I think Warhammer and I think BattleTech, they just use regular dice. So if I don't play them a lot, but I think in Warhammer you'll roll like a whole bunch of regular dice.
Right, there are other dice systems.
Right, so these other systems usually use dice to add a little bit of randomness. So that's a really common thing. But the whole, you know, Dungeons & Dragons having the D20, and it used to be you have a D8 and a D12 and a D6 and all these things.
We still have all those. Those things generally do damage. The D20 is for, I roll the D20 for my abilities.
So the D20 system with all these different array of dice is probably more specific to D&D.
I know a D6 is just
a dice. Right.
I do know that.
If it's singular, it's die.
Yeah. Right. I knew that.
They have a D%. Isn't there a D% too, where you
roll 2 D10s? And one of them
is the tens place, one of them is the ones place. That's if you're rolling a percent. But I think Warhammer, you roll like a crap load of D6s, you know, and you roll like 10 D6s or whatever. Just for I don't know exactly how it works, but
so I just Googled dice role playing systems, and
Go through the list. Let's see how many I've even
Special
heard of.
came up. I'm actually vaguely familiar with Special.
Yeah.
Because that's from Fallout. And that's like, it's an acronym for strength, perception, endurance, charisma, intellect, agility, and luck. Probably, right?
Right.
So I'm familiar with that one. There's also fudge.
Right. I saw those on the rundown.
Do you know what fudge is?
GURPS.
Okay, GURPS.
GURPS.
I had actually kind of vaguely heard of GURPS, and I think it's like generic or general universal role-playing system or something like that. And it doesn't matter if it's fantasy, it doesn't matter if it's magic, it doesn't matter if it's sci-fi. It's general, and you can apply it to any setting. And it's
not licensed, obviously. I'm sure it's free.
Yeah, so I'm sure some of it probably licensing from Wizards of the Coast. Their D20 rules is probably there's pros and cons to that, and probably a lot of these alternative ones maybe come up from not necessarily wanting to maybe license from.
Yeah, and they're kind of complicated. You can make them. You don't have to, especially video game companies, don't have to use that rule set and make it as complicated as D&D can be, because you can just say, well, this character can or can't do those things. You don't have to allow for, when programming videos, you don't necessarily have to allow for the imagination of the player. There are things that you're just not going to program.
This is not on the rundown, but joke's on me, there's no rundown tonight, right? So I want to ask this because it's kind of an interesting thing that's unique, I think, to these role-playing games. You're not, obviously you don't get it in the video games, but in the tabletop version is the role of the Dungeon Master. Like a lot of us' first experience with that was Stranger Things. Right? Or
you don't remember the 80s commercials for where they have the Dungeon Master screen and
I do totally remember that. I do totally remember that. But like, talk a little bit about the kind of the concept and the experience of playing a game where everybody's playing the game, but one person, their role in the game is to like run the game. It's not like a referee. It's more interactive than a referee, but like.
So you're the storyteller.
It's kind of like a referee too, but a storyteller and a referee.
Your job is the DM, or GM is what they call them now, because they're game masters. Because you're not just dwelling in dungeons anymore. Your role should be, in my opinion, to make sure your players are having fun at all times. So other people disagree with that. Other people want to have fun as the DM and just throw mobs at people. And there's a bunch of different ways, but your job is, there is a story, and your job is to get the players through it. Sometimes that means you have to dumb down your encounters so they can actually survive. If you don't want a total party kill, TPK.
Acronyms, very big in the role-playing world. Yes. I've discovered that.
So, you just, basically your role as the GM is to make the story happen. Sometimes they just get to a part where they're like, I thought very easy puzzle. The players were looking for some. They were on a mission to figure out these coins that people were passing around as part of a thieves guild, and they wanted to know how to use them. And they get to this wall, and I describe what I think is a pretty good description of like a vending machine coin slot. And the guy who's supposed to be the investigator in the party just is sitting at the table for like 20 minutes. Like, man, I just don't know what to do with these. Can I reach them? Like, no, you can't reach them both at the same time. It's like, I want to stick my fingers in them. Like, okay, y'all have these 2 coins. And finally, one of the other players just goes, I take the 2 coins and I go stick them in the slots. Okay, the walls open up. But like at some point, you just can't, without just saying, just stick the coins in the slot. Like, forget the puzzle. Just do this so we can move on. Sometimes you get to that point, and sometimes things that you think are super simple aren't, but your goal is basically just to get them through the story.
And it's fun in its own way.
Right.
Like the Dungeon Master, and you make up the whole story. Like there's books and like general plot lines of most of these fantasy settings where you can go tell a story in that world, right? But generally the Dungeon Master writes a story and then turns it in. Everybody
does their own thing. So Gruber has, since she's running a bunch of things right now for Start Playing, she has a bunch of modules that she bought, which is basically the campaign already written. And so she has all the monsters and everything, and it's her job to get the players through it. Every playthrough is different, but that's what we do on Monday nights, is we do one-shots. In my campaign that's been running since 2007, have never used anything pre-made. In fact, a lot of times they sit at the table and they're like, what are we doing tonight, boss? I'm like, well, y'all are here. What would y'all like to do? And kind of make it up on the fly. I have a bunch of, like a stack of monsters for whatever I think they need to encounter wherever they are. But most of it is just ad hoc, whatever they decide to go do.
Let's talk for a minute about making the transition as an industry and as us in this podcast from the tabletop onto the computer or console. I think most of these, especially originally, were PC games, but talk a little bit about the difference in experience of like the chance and the rules, knowing the rules and actually rolling the dice, being very connected to the rules and very connected to the chance of the game. As you move to the computer, all that's done by the computer. And does that like change the experience or lessen the experience if you're not as connected to the rules and you're not as involved as a dungeon master? Like how is the experience of playing on tabletop different than as we kind of move into video games? How is the experience different playing D20 on tabletop? Take that one.
Yeah.
The one thing you completely missed, the most important difference is you're playing by yourself almost exclusively. Yep. When you're playing computer CRPGs, you're almost exclusively playing by yourself, playing through the story with a computer, as opposed to playing with other players. So it's less social. I would say that's the main difference. But it's easier to do because you don't have to get 4 or 5 guys together with 4 hours. So like I would sit by myself and play through these games all the time. I mean,
that's when I say I'm familiar with the memes. I'm familiar with all the memes about how impossible it is to schedule. Yeah, right. You get halfway through a campaign, so and no one gets back together.
Right. So that's definitely legitimate. And so the main difference with the computer games is you're playing through them at your own pace. You're doing what you ever want to do. You're playing all the characters. All these games that we're going to talk about, pretty much, you still build a party. You still travel as a party, but you're playing the whole party. And so, that's the main difference, I would say. Not so much, to me, it's never that much different rolling the dice yourself or letting the computer roll the dice for you. I mean, you're still going to think you still think that the dice are working against you, whether it's the computer doing it or the dice doing it, Yeah. But I think it's a totally different experience.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about
both great experiences. It's a totally different experience.
I hadn't even thought about how the fact that role-playing tabletop is almost exclusively a group of people.
Yeah, I would say that is
computer is almost not 100% probably, but almost exclusively single player.
I mean, they have a little bit of multiplayer functionality in Baldur's Gate. A huge one I think you could play 6 players in it. But in the new Baldur's Gate that just came out, you can kind of play multiplayer, but I guarantee you, even people that...
It definitely did it way better than any of the other games that I've played.
But even the new one, Baldur's Gate 3, I bet you it's 99% played alone. I just bet it is. Just one player playing the game. That's the main difference, I would say.
Anything to add to that, Dawson?
Not really. I mean, the function of the dice is... I feel like you feel way more connected to the dice in the newer games than you did in the older games. Like, I had the D&D gold box in the 90s that we bought at Walmart, where Stein is now. And you didn't really necessarily have to know the rules. You kind of just played, and everything was behind the scenes. I don't know that in those games there was even a way to look at the dice rolls. Then you kind of got to Baldur's Gate 1 where you could hit a button and you could see the dice rolls at the bottom, but it was largely irrelevant. I feel like there's a lot more integration of actually seeing the dice rolls.
In Baldur's Gate 3, they throw the dice right at you. They make it clear. They make it clear this is a substitute for a tabletop game. Yeah. But especially in the really old ones, the gold box games, and the
even Icewind Dale and all those that came out.
They
in the
didn't
late
hammer 90s. The dice part.
Yeah.
So if you didn't know that everything, and sometimes you would even get a percentage, but the percentage would always be a factor of 5. It's 95%. If you didn't know that was coming from a D20 roll, it didn't hit you in the face all the time, or like you just know.
You kind of had to go out of your way to find it.
Yeah, you had to go dig for it to find it. And in all the Baldur's Gate games, you could go drill down. You go double click on something and drill down. You can get actually a dice roll for each thing, and you could see, okay, my attack roll was this, and it has all these different additions to it, which I always loved doing that. Yeah. But it didn't hammer it in the face.
Because you're kind of like, you want to get into the math of it.
Yeah, that's right. Baldur's Gate 3, though, does an awesome job of just throwing it right in your face. And you literally, you would think it was like you're worried about...
Is that the newest one that just came out last year?
Like, one of the achievements is you unlock gold dice.
Yeah, right, different dice. But like, what's the... not suspension of disbelief, but your
integration.
Yeah, well, like you feel like you're in the game. What's the word? Immersion. So you would think it kills your immersion in the game, and it probably does technically, but you're like immersed.
It's just a different type of it.
Yeah.
It's more like
you sit here
tabletop.
and you go up to a lock and you pull out your lock pick and these dice come up on the screen and you click roll and you click re-roll and you know, like it was awesome. Baldur's Gate 3 did a great job of that.
So last thing before we move into some specific video games that y'all are going to have to tell me because I don't even know what they are. But one last thing kind of about the differences is in tabletop, obviously exclusively turn-based. But on computer, there are some real-time elements in some of these games. There's nothing like that in tabletop, right? Yeah. Like the only one that I'm familiar with that I'm sure we'll talk about is Knights of the Old Republic. Has a little bit of real-time with pause. Active time. You know.
What you're referring to there is called real-time with pause.
Yeah.
Baldur's Gate 3 went totally the other direction. It's only turn-based. But all the really, really popular ones were like when we were growing up, they got into real-time and real-time with pause.
So there's a Baldur's Gate 2 expansion that actually uses the same system that Baldur's Gate 3 does. That's supposedly super awesome.
All right, so let's talk now about some specific games.
Okay.
Do a timeline of the computer games that are these D20 role-playing games.
Okay.
And let's just move through them as we're gonna whatever leisurely pace y'all decide we want to move through.
Okay, we're gonna have to look this up. But y'all remember the old Nintendo game, not Nintendo, the old Atari game? It's on Ready Player One. It was called like Adventure.
Yeah.
And you were like literally a square.
You were a square. Yeah.
So there is a dungeon crawler or origin game that is like that game. It's like so unbelievably basic, and it's not called Adventure. We're gonna have to look it up. It's called something like, you know, Dragon Treasure or Dragon's Lair or Treasure Cave. It's like something really, really basic, and it's all completely text-based. And it's like two people, like a husband and wife, made it, and it was like the first ever like dungeon crawling RPG where you say forward, 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 left, turn left, you know, inspect, those kind of things.
In the old AOL
we're gonna have to look it up.
There were a bunch of MUDs.
Multi-user dungeon.
Yes. So
acronyms.
Anytime somebody says an acronym, the other person needs to like spout out what the acronym is.
All right, go ahead. I'm going to go back to an acronym, but you finish where you were starting.
Yeah. So back in the I remember logging into AOL with my
America
2400 baud modem. Baud is technically an acronym, isn't it?
Baud is not an acronym. Baud does not. BAUD is a word.
Like these people that are listening to this podcast never even heard that word.
No, it doesn't stand for something. It's a word. It's not an acronym. It stands for something.
So I remember logging in AOL with my 2400 baud modem.
Lewis says, "You've got mail." Yeah, I heard it when he said it. I heard it in the voice when he said it. Yeah.
And anyway, so you could go to these sites and they would have MUDs that were just so complicated that I couldn't even get into them at the time. And then you sort of walked out of that into probably the biggest an MMO, but role-playing game was after that was EverQuest. And then they had the Gold Box games, which had come out in around 90, I think.
Eric, you mentioned that earlier too, Gold Box games. What's Gold Box games?
So the Gold Box game was a collection of games. Yeah. There was a bunch of different lines of them, but I think it was Infogrames that later made Get Medieval. They put out all these AD&D games that were based off of books. On one disc, so it was 9 of them. There was Curse of the Azure Bonds, Pools of Radiance, which we used to.
Pools of Radiance, yeah. We used to real life pretend that game.
Yeah.
I remember that.
There was one like Queen of Dark Queen of Kryn.
So
that's the one that I played of the Gold Box.
And
I think it's kind of terrible.
Those are both Dragonlance novels.
Okay.
Based off of. And then maybe it was Riders of Kryn and Dark Queen of Kryn. So those were with Raceland. And not Tristan Kendrick. That's from. Okay, I digress. We move on. Anyway, so the Gold Box games, and then probably the first thing that I can think of after that was the first Baldur's Gate, and then they had Icewind Dale, which was leaps and bounds better. then I don't.
The gold box games were, you said timeline. That was like late 80s.
Yeah, I was trying to
early
think.
90s.
I was fixing to jump in and say
1988.
I think it was 90 to 92.
I know,
the original release to the gold box.
And so, and it was they came in gold boxes, and it was maybe 8 or 10 games, something like that. Maybe more than that. Maybe 12 or 15.
The D&D one was 9 specifically.
And they were like not text based. They were graphical, but like not much graphics.
It was sprites, and you could change like 4 colors. Yep. They were.
You could pick like
very cheap.
You could pick from like each character. You could pick from like 4 or 5 different heads, and then bodies, and each body could palette swap. And they were probably Dungeons and Dragons like first edition.
No, they were second edition.
Second edition. Second edition was around for a long time.
It was around for a long time.
So they were like very rudimentary graphics. Like I'm trying to think of well, not even Game Boy, like older than Game Boy.
It's
probably
basically Atari graphics.
Yeah, probably 200 pixels. 240 by.
The very last one had upgraded graphics and had animations, so your person would actually like move their arm when they attacked.
Yeah, and you're talking about a guy who's 20 pixels tall. And you're moving around the map is just, in squares like
shuffling.
this. And then in like a quarter of the screen, you would have like a 100 by 100 picture of like a tree. And then you would move forward, and then it'd be like another tree. And then, if the battle, sometimes you would go to like a battle map where you would move characters around.
A lot of times on those games, the battle map would be you would get locked in place and be in the same section of the map. One game I forgot before Baldur's Gate was Sega Genesis had Warriors of the Eternal Sun on it. Which was a second
I've heard of
edition
that one. I've never played it, but I've heard of that one.
And you get trapped.
They have that for Steam too. If you search like Dungeons and Dragons on Steam, that'll come up, I think, because I've seen it.
And then there was Dungeon Hack that was also in there. That was a D20 based game, and that was just a dungeon crawler. It was a roguelike though.
Okay.
Corey's brain is fried.
If you're not watching live, you're hearing the sound you're hearing is my eyes glazing over right now. So it's fine though. I love it. I love y'all talking about it. Let's move forward in time a little bit.
So
let's move forward in time.
Right. So that was that time period is people like only me and Dustin still know what that is, or people that are a little older than us maybe. But
That's
after
like 90
that,
to 95.
So right after that was like rapid fire. You had Neverwinter Nights, Planescape Torment, Baldur's Gate, all those together. That was like 3 of the best computer RPGs like ever written. Bam, 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 all at once.
Neverwinter 2 came out in 2000.
And then they all had sequels. And so like that was, and those were a lot more graphically tolerable games. You're talking about.
You know what? Neverwinter still somewhat holds up. Neverwinter holds up better than Final Fantasy VII.
Well, the thing I liked about the Baldur's Gate engine, and I think it was called Infinity, was the name of the engine, maybe, or something like that.
Correct.
I think it holds up really well because it's pretty looking sprites. They're not good. Resolution.
Right, it's like ragdoll cutouts.
They're not trying to be realistic. They're just it's. And now you're talking about like full screen, images of the map and city. If you go in a city, you can walk around the city and stuff that are more like what we would consider like a real video game when you're in that Baldur's Gate era. That's when you had like the games that we talked about earlier, Four Crystals of Trazier and Wizardry and those kind of games where we would consider them like a real video game. And still the D20 rule set is still running at all.
Four Crystals of Trazier, if you
hang on. One more thing. Mouse, point and click.
That was big.
So
getting to use the mouse.
Point and click now.
Changed the world.
You can even grab more than one character at a time, like making a box. So now we're in like the modern era.
I do remember Four Crystals of Trazier, and that one had some of that real time. You had some AI would control your other players, but the battle was going on in real time, and it wasn't turn based.
And it was
it's in Baldur's Gate. It's turn based behind the scenes, which is why you see your characters' animations. They'll move and they'll swing, but nothing will happen.
Right.
It's because it's not their turn in the combat yet, but to make it seem like everything's happening.
Yep.
Like if you want to just let your characters all run and fight, they can all run and fight. And if you're overpowering the monsters, it's fine. You just go do it. But it's not actually real time. Trezier was real time. It kind of was more like almost like Diablo, and it was like a over like
3/4
top down, like a 3/4 view.
Isometric kind of, yeah.
And you're kind of going through doors, and there was still some dungeon crawling kind of aspect to it. The dungeons, the maps were still essentially groups of squares. Go to this door. There's a door behind it. A room behind it. There's a square room behind it. Right. So there was still, and you would still draw your maps.
That sounds like Lightbringer.
But so I want to touch on like maps. It's something I want to touch on. There's also going back. I wanted to touch on the cadence of the games. So let me go back before I forget stuff. We talked about Baldur's Gate and Planescape and Neverwinter Nights being like so fast. Then they would all have sequels, and that's because and then all those gold box games, those 12 or whatever, how many of them? That's over the course of about 3 or 4 years, because the games were so simple. 4 guys could make the game, and it didn't have to sell 6 million copies to be successful. If they release a game, that game sells 100,000 copies worldwide. Right, it's already funded itself, and they can have a sequel out if they use the same game engine. You could have a sequel in the same year, almost maybe. You could almost have it. You could have like a game in Christmas. If that game sells 100,000 copies, the next Christmas could be the same game, a sequel.
The
which
Gold
is
Box
now,
games were also unique because they were all except for Pool of Radiance, which the book for Pool of Radiance was based off of the game. All the other ones were based on books already.
It's really amazing that, because like you said, one of them was like a husband and wife.
Yeah.
And then
That was that
ones
first one I was trying to remember. You're
talking about probably games that had 10, 15
development teams
developers.
of 10 people. Yeah.
And they would come out with a game every year. And now AAA games have 2,500 people working on the game. 3 years into the development cycle, the game launches broken.
Yeah.
And then it takes them 6 months more to even get the game working. It's just
now,
like
some of these gold box games, though, some of them did launch broken. That was the thing back then. Bugs was a thing. Yeah,
they couldn't just have a launch day patch.
Right.
So let me go. So now let's talk about maps. And one of the things about the old CRPGs, and I don't know if you remember this. You remember this some. There was this Lord of the Rings game we had on Super Nintendo. You had to make maps for.
Oh, I totally remember that game.
But on the gold box games, and to some extent, like some of the little bit newer ones, but not so much Baldur's Gate, but the older ones. You would literally get an instruction manual, and the instruction manual would have 2/3 of the game in it. So like sometimes you would come up to a conversation, you're talking to the princess or whatever, and it'll say, refer to the journal entry on page 27 for this conversation. And then it'll be this long thing, right? So then you got to go read this long thing.
Was that digital rights management?
It's a combination of DRM, because they also had you start the game and it says, go to page 26 and the third word after the title on page 26, what's that word? But then it was a little bit more of just, I think it was just cool. It would say, go pull out this journal entry, and then you go read this journal entry, and it might be, half a page long. It's not books and books and
like
books.
King's Quest had Guide to the Green Isles that you had to have to play the game because all the lore was there.
Yeah. So some of it was they interacted with the book, they interacted with the thing, and you would have maps in the instruction manual, and it was just kind of a.
Sometimes it's kind of like it's almost like it's part of the game, like it's a fourth wall
that's
breaching.
What I'm saying. It's totally part of the game.
Now they put that in the what do they call it in Halo? The
terminals.
Like they put that stuff in games now.
Right. It was kind of the same feeling though,
if you
and
want.
you didn't. So sometimes it was DRM. But sometimes it was just part of the game, and you go read the game, and then you would have pages and pages and pages of monster stats, where if you wanted to go look at the monster stats, you could. But it wasn't all horrible, just DRM, although some of it was, because you'd have a floppy disk, and those were as easy to copy as anything ever.
Right.
So they had to have
which is why we had a printed copy of the Menzer Ransom book, because you had to flip to page 42 and find word 5.
So on the roguelikes, on games that are roguelike, which means you start over every time. If you die, everything gets erased, you start over. Now you're making maps on those games because the map is usually randomly generated every game. So there's some kind of algorithm that randomly generates a map, and so you're drawing a map new every time. But that's not really what I was talking about on the CRPGs. It's more about almost like to give you something tactile to use while you're playing the game as an enhancement of the game.
Yeah. I mean, I remember for a while they would send you, and part of your player pack for buying the game would be like a cloth map that would come with it. Just
something fancy.
That was always cool.
And because like your guy, your half elf magic user is 4 pixels.
Yeah.
Right. So you got a picture of that character or whatever. It's a much more nicer looking picture.
So this has been some fascinating, enlightening conversation. Seriously, I'm not being sarcastic. It really is very good quality conversation about the history of kind of the D&D video game kind of genre. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move into kind of forward in the timeline a little bit and go from kind of the late 80s, early 90s, move into the late 90s, early 2000s, talk about some games of that era, and then move into some more modern games. But I think we were going to pick up with
I wanted to pick up with
2, maybe.
Well, Baldur's Gate 2 is only not worth talking about because it's exactly like Baldur's Gate 1, but better in every way.
Yeah.
It didn't really change a whole lot.
It was a lot buggier.
What's that? Was it buggier? Was it? Yeah.
At release.
Betrayal at Krondor, I remember that, actually.
Right, so the reason I want to talk about Betrayal at Krondor, it was right after those games, early 90s. Dustin says he thinks 1993, which could be right. Well, I remember seeing it in stores, on computers, running.
Yeah.
At Sam's.
That's right. Sam's. We literally stood in the aisle at Sam's. We played it on the computer there.
Betrayal at Krondor, and then that Star Wars game where you're driving down the thing. But Betrayal at Krondor was sort of like, it kind of did for CRPGs what Final Fantasy VII did for JRPGs, which is like make it cool, bring it to the masses.
The guys on the football team were playing Final Fantasy VII.
And they probably weren't playing Betrayal at Krondor, right? But it made it accessible and cool. So in Betrayal at Krondor, you didn't have to know all these systems, and you didn't create characters. You played through the book, and it was more accessible.
Written by Raymond D. Feist. So Sierra contacted Raymond D. Feist and said, "Hey, we want to make a role-playing game. Will you write our story?" He was like, "I can do that."
Yeah. And it's a whole universe now.
Yeah,
it's a whole series of books.
Well, it already took place on his Midkim
that's
world,
right,
and that's why they contacted him back when Sierra was awesome.
So the gameplay in Betrayal at Krondor was completely turn-based. So that's the way the heavy story and turn-based combat went towards Betrayal at Krondor. The other way, the less story and more action. If maybe people might disagree, but I would say it went to Diablo. Is where the other side went. More action, more clicking, spamming clicks, a little bit more instant gratification.
You're talking about like the genre divided.
Yes.
Into the
right. So Diablo has there's no D-20 or anything, but there are some sort of mechanical systems you can manipulate and memorize and go dive in all those numbers, but very clicky, very action.
Yeah. Diablo was really kind of like the first. It was really, as the first I know, the first procedurally generated dungeons.
Right. Yeah. There were roguelikes with procedurally generated dungeons before, but they were just squares.
Right.
The maps were just squares.
When y'all were talking about those earlier, Diablo is what I thought of immediately.
Yeah. It's basically the first roguelite.
Yeah. Right. Roguelite. Right. Yeah. Diablo is sort of the action evolution of these games, as opposed to Betrayal at Krondor, which is the
one thing Krondor did that didn't really catch on is there's no leveling up in Krondor. You get better through doing actions. Yeah. So like the next game that I saw that did that was
lockpicking.
Oh, dude, lockpicking.
Spamming those lockpicks.
Yeah.
The next game that I saw that did that was called it came out in 2001. Of Dungeon Siege.
Okay, I know of the game. I never played it. So you get better by doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's like 7 years later, Dungeon Siege comes out and says, yeah, we'll give that a try. There could be other ones. That's the next one that I'm familiar with.
We're now into the mid-90s, right? So when do we get into Fallout? Late 90s?
The first two Fallouts were around...
been contemporary with Diablo, I would think, based on remembering what they looked like.
I never played them. They were total... turn-based tactical RPGs. Yep. There was a lot of hiding and stuff.
Fallout 1 and Fallout 2 were sort of slow and plodding turn-based combat. But they had a little bit more, well, like Baldur's Gate and stuff, they were relatively what we would now call open world, which is basically you can just kind of go wherever you want. They were kind of that way too, a little bit of a sort of an open world kind of mentality. But they were also, Fallout kind of instigated you can kind of be bad if you want to. You can kind of be good if you want to. Your choices kind of can affect different plot lines and stuff like that. But you didn't have to just play through the story. You could a little bit of flexibility as far as how you want to go solve a problem. If you want to go in and just kill everything, you can kill everything. They did a little bit of that too.
Be a bad guy pre-Fable.
You can kind of be a bad guy. Fable made famous. You can be a bad guy if you want to. And it turned out I didn't love Fable really. I mean, it wasn't bad, but
The first one gets rave reviews. I never played any of them.
To me,
it was supposed to be like an Xbox killer app, wasn't it?
And because they basically they over-marketed it as far as they just said, oh, do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want, anything you want. You can do anything you want, and it just didn't.
And really, it was like every once in a while you get an A or B choice.
Yeah, and you can play through the story, and you can pick all the bad choices, and your god grows horns, or you can pick all the good choices, and your god gets a halo. You know, maybe not exactly, but. It was a good game. It was not a bad game, but it wasn't life changing.
I definitely wanted to bring up Fallout because it's just kind of relevant right now because the TV show is pretty hot right now, and I think it's great video game adaptation. You know, but I had no idea. We played Fallout 76 for like maybe 10 minutes, and
I got a couple hours.
I mean, we literally like one. I mean, maybe it was an hour, but it was one sitting. Yeah. And that was the only exposure I had to Fallout, and I had no idea. And that by then it was first person shooter type. It still had role playing elements, but
so the third
looking at it for just a few minutes, it was first person shooter game as far as I was concerned.
Yeah,
I had no idea it had this history as a turn based D20 RPG. I had no idea.
So the third one was third person over the shoulder, much like Helldivers is.
Yep.
And so that was sort of the turning point that made that game, that franchise, much more marketable.
And then they went to first person after that. And the reason they have in Fallout, so they have this ability where you like focus in. I don't remember exactly what it's called in Fallout in the first person ones, where you like focus in, everything kind of pauses, and you can like select what you want to do. That's because they started out turn based. They kind of carried that one little vestige of the turn based thing in there. It's like you. I don't remember what it's called, but it's like you like a focus, and everything kind of goes to ultra slow motion. You can
bullet time.
Bullet time. That's right. Yeah.
When did obviously
I'm looking at just some quick dates.
The primary setting for these types of games is a kind of a high fantasy setting. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say Fallout 1997. So now we're in the late 90s.
In the late 90s. Okay, yeah. Which is Diablo? I think was 95. I thought 96, 95.
Probably around then. Yeah.
Yeah. So the primary setting for the history of all these games, I think, would typically be fantasy. But are there any other divergent, popular ones like Fallout, which is not at all fantasy related?
Well, there's
particularly when it's like this Atom Punk, post-apocalypse.
Well, there's Starfinder, which is set in space.
Well, I was gonna say Warhammer is a bunch of different. Warhammer is a few different worlds, and one of them is Warhammer 40K, which is Space Marines and Space Marines and aliens and stuff like that.
Cool. So where do we go? Where do we go from 1998? When do we get to KOTOR?
When did KOTOR? I never played it.
That's a good question. It was on the Xbox, early Xbox.
I want to say it was like 03 or something like that.
It would have been early 2000s. Let's just see if the internet
Fable
knows.
would have come out between those, I would think. Fable was our senior year, 2000, 2001. Yeah. But we've already passed this. Neverwinter came out in 2000, 2002. So after that...
So just cheating a little bit here. Knights of the Old Republic released in 2003. Which is probably around when Fable was too. Knights of the Old Republic is a fully D20, and it says this is a D20 computer role-playing system, but it's not licensed Dungeons and Dragons, but it's basically the same thing. I mean, you roll a D20 to hit. Okay. I think
and all that is accessible in the game.
Yeah, you can go look, and it'll say you roll your attack dice, and then you compare that to their defense, and then you roll a critical and all those things. And if you roll a 20, that's a crit. Then you roll to confirm the crit and that kind of thing, and all that stuff is in there. But it's not D&D licensed. They have a name for it, some D20 system.
Yeah, a lot of different ones have their own system.
I remember playing Knights of the Old Republic and having like no idea what that meant. When it was like saving throws, this and that and the other, and roll of D, whatever. And I was like, what is this talking about? And I think you kind of explained it to me like, well, it's Dungeons and Dragons rules. It's all happening in the background. And that was like, because I was just playing it because it was a Star Wars role playing.
That's what you did.
That's what I didn't know. You know, it's just a Star Wars game, so you play it, right? Yeah. Where do we go from there? And obviously there was a KOTOR 2, but we don't need to necessarily.
KOTOR 2 was decent, but not life changing.
There was kind of an RPG wasteland for a long time.
Well, I think what happened about then and late Super Nintendo is JRPGs kind of took over, and the old CRPG style game kind of lost momentum or popularity.
CRPG. What is this?
Computer.
Oh, computer RPG. But as opposed to TTRPG being tabletop.
Turn-based tactical RPGs. sort of just died off whenever the thing that happened in the early 2000s was games like Drakengard and stuff like that, and Dynasty Warriors that we got to talk about.
Dynasty Warriors.
All those games sort of came out in the early 2000s, and they're just hack and slash mob killers. And so you still level up a character and you go do this, but it's all instantly rewarding, and you get to see your character level up and get stronger. And that sort of took over. Like one of the ones that we would have played was like maybe Wise 3 got a reboot, and that was sort of an action RPG.
Do you say it Wise?
I do.
Okay, is that correct or is it Ease?
I have no idea.
Right. Okay. That you would remember.
Is this an acronym?
It's Y apostrophe S,
and I think it's Ease, but I don't know.
Okay.
But that was the name of the world. Ease.
Wise. I've never
Wise. In my head, I call it Wise.
I've literally never heard of that.
Wanderers from Wise was the one that we on Super Nintendo. Right. So that was like that's the third one. You would have seen that in Cat's video. We talk about Cat's video.
That does sound vaguely familiar.
Wanderers from Wise, or Ease. I think it's Ease.
That could be.
Because I think that's like the Japanese word they just Americanized by just saying this is just a Y. But
that would make sense. But yeah, so that style of game really took off, and it was a long time before you really started getting into turn-based games again.
Another thing that happened around that same time, maybe it was related, maybe it wasn't, but what kind of took over in tabletop RPGs and CRPGs on the computer, like we're talking about, you make the character and you play the way you play through the story. What kind of went by the wayside is that you make the character thing, and what took its place is these really, really dramatic told storylines, like in Final Fantasy and all the JRPGs, where the thing became play through the story to learn the story and what's happening to the character. Not so much as you make the character that you want, more so you take on the role of the protagonist in the game.
Yeah.
And then these complex stories are being told, and that existed for a long time, which was very different.
Yeah. Another one
we got into that too. We started playing all these Final Fantasy games, all these JRPGs, and we kind of quit playing all the D&D style RPGs.
So the hybrid of that is Demon's Stone came out around that era as well, early 2000s, and it's another hack and slash mob killer game, and you play the role of 3 different protagonists. There's a male fighter, but it's set in the D&D realm. You think one of the characters is from Nesme, and Ari Salvatore wrote the storyline for it. Patrick Stewart is the voice of one of the main protagonists.
Sweet.
Michael Clark Duncan was the voice of another one. And so there's a lot of big voice actors in this one. But it's D&D based, sort of, but it's really just a hack and slash with a D&D skin.
So the kind of the modern action RPGs, like the Elder Scrolls and stuff, did that come out of, like you were talking earlier about how the kind of the genre divided into Diablo, and did the modern, actually Lewis asked about Skyrim, and wasn't it similar in the way it played to Fallout 4? But like, do the modern RPGs that are like kind of the mainstream ones, did they come out of this, or was that something coming from somewhere else?
Well, Elder Scrolls it's always been first person, even when the graphics were questionable. I didn't play Daggerfall, was like the second one, and then there was something, and then Oblivion, and then the famous one,
Morrowind, one of them.
That might have been the second one, yeah. And then Daggerfall, and then Oblivion, and then the famous one now is Skyrim. That's the one that just took the world by storm, right? Yeah. Those are very, very numerical, very number crunching. A lot of stats and a lot of things to keep track of. They're not. I don't think they're D20 related at all. But I would say they probably came from the Betrayal at Krondor route.
Yeah.
They're not as hack and slashy as Diablo. Diablo, you can basically ignore everything that's going on the screen. You can basically just ignore everything and just click.
Yeah. Well, not in the first one. You never got overpowered in the first one.
You could still pretty much just click. It was still more about the clicking than it was the stat chasing.
I think those
they definitely doubled down on that in the second.
If you consider the two splits, Betrayal at Krondor very much took the story. You're playing a character, all that. Elder Scrolls is not that way. Elder Scrolls, you make your character. It's
Elder
more
Scrolls is a lot more
right.
like
There's none of those games where you play an existing character. You always make your own character.
Man, there's a very popular franchise that the name's escaping me right now. There were a bunch of them. Heroes of Might and
Magic. Yeah.
It's a lot more like that.
Yeah. I would have played that, or I used to play that, until I took an arrow.
No, I took an arrow to the knee. Yeah.
Isn't that from
That's from Elder Scrolls. That's from Skyrim. Yeah.
Okay.
But those games were all good. Really, I mean, like manufacturers just released banger after banger after banger. Whoever was making Elder Scrolls that whole time.
Bethesda, wasn't it?
Was it Bethesda? Or I was thinking
Did they crash every 5 minutes?
No, but every one of those games was good. Like the reason, and Oblivion, when Oblivion came out, it was also really graphically impressive. They used it for benchmarks and stuff like that. But the reason it was famous is because the one before it was really good. And the reason Skyrim is famous is because Oblivion was really good. And they've been good. I mean, they've been great games every time.
So we can't really have this whole conversation without, at least while I'm getting ready for the next segment. The game of the year of 2023 was Baldur's Gate 3, right? So that's kind of the pinnacle of this whole genre of games, right?
I don't see. So
Baldur's Gate 3 came out, and I don't know what happened for the next 3 months.
Right,
and then I came back to the world of reality after that. It was an unbelievable game. I played it a tiny bit in the alpha or beta, whatever, or what do they call it now? Pre-release.
Yeah.
Where you buy it.
Where you pay the full $60.
I bought it, and I did. I played a little bit of it, but I was careful not to play too much. And then when it came out, man, that game was unbelievable.
We got to get through this. It's been great talking, but I want to move gently into the mailbag, which we have a question that's related to this that comes from our friend. Is it Haunted Otis? Whatever Jack's name is.
Something about dice in the chat.
Yeah. So Jack's question. We have one question. It's hot topic. Why can you not only have one set of dice?
Well, once you are into D&D. And people know you're into D&D, at least one of your friends is going to buy you a set of dice for Christmas
every year.
and your birthday.
Every year, basically.
Yeah. That's the reason I have a bunch of sets. You have other people like Potion Seller who sees an ad for dice and has impulse problems.
Yeah.
And buys them.
So I think a good kind of answer to Jack's question is there any reason?
There is no reason.
In-game reason, competitive reason, or story reason to have more than one set of dice.
Go ahead.
Yes.
I got to find a story. But
so one of the reasons is you like your dice to match.
If you lose one.
And so my ex-girlfriend lost my D6, so I had to buy a whole new set to get another D6. So
you definitely need your dice to match. You can't have not matching dice. I was reading in preparation.
Good to play good.
So right? I was reading a quick thing about some other. I think I was looking up about Warhammer or something like that, and it was this long story about this guy that said, I'm new to the game and I'm just playing with regular dice, but I keep getting bad dice rolls, and my buddies who play tell me that I'm supposed to be using special expensive dice because these dice are known to be not weighted well, and they are known to have consistently bad rolls. And it's like, I'm thinking, this cannot be real. Surely this is fake, and it probably was fake, but it was such a killer story. All my buddies, they're trying to help me out. They're telling me these dice are just not right. I'm supposed to have expensive dice because the rolls are going to be better, and it's like, oh my goodness. Okay,
so look,
you're using that bat? You're using those batting gloves?
Yeah, that's not the right
you're
ones.
striking out.
Right.
So look, I've been using these purple dice since I've been running a game, and I roll nat 20s and max out my rolls all the time.
Really good roller. Dustin's a really good roller.
Really
so
solid.
It's just, it's obviously just happenstance, but like, you're the DM, you roll the most, so everybody remembers when you roll crits and everything. Then I rolled up my new character for this campaign named Canticus, joking, and then Jessica had us roll for our stats, so me and my buddy are rolling at the table, and I just used his dice because they were on the table. After I was done, I was like, oh man, I should have used my loaded dice to roll my stats. He about flipped the table. He's like, are you serious?
Yeah.
You've been waxing us with those dice for 15 years.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I'm joking.
It was just one joke.
But like, he thought I was serious. He really thought that those dice were loaded and I'd just been cheating for 15 years.
Yep.
All right, so thanks for the question, Jack. Anybody else that has questions, ask us in our Discord. We love getting questions. We love answering your questions because ultimately we want to talk about on this show what you guys want us to talk about. So while I'm getting ready to transition into trivia,
everybody's favorite part
of the show, right? Dustin, give us a recap of what happened when you rolled the bard out of the not bard.
Oh yeah, how did Jessica like that?
Well, she actually loves it. We got ready to play this campaign, and I was like, man, I've never actually gotten to play a bard. If you're running the game, I'll get to play one. Like, I usually roll one up at level 3, and we quit by level 5, whatever. I don't really get to play it that much, and I've always been the DM. So I'm going to roll up a bard. Well, the last 2 campaigns she'd run, the person that played the bard just did the typical horny bard trope. She's like, you're not playing a bard. I mean, I'm joking. You can do whatever you want, but I do not want anybody to play a bard ever again. It's like, all right, that's fine. I'll play a cleric, I guess. And then I'll start looking through. Clerics can do trickery domain now. So you can be deception is a class skill now. Cool. Oh, and you get to start with an instrument as a item. Oh, you can have 5e uses a background. Oh, Grand Minstrel and Performer are both backgrounds. Okay, I can do this. So I have all bard stats with my cleric. And this last time we played, I didn't cast a single spell. I just walked in, said, "Oh, that's a tall elf. All right, I go tell her in Elvish that she's the most beautiful creature I've ever seen and would like to escort her around the museum." And then we went from there. She loved it.
Okay, so this is kind of a related question before we move into trivia. How much does getting on the Dungeon Master's good side or bad side affect the campaign? Like, obviously, they're not going to just because they're mad at you derail their whole campaign. But you played that. It was a risk. You could have very much got on the Dungeon Master's bad side by playing it that way, right?
Which is double trouble for me.
For you, because you go home later that night and you see the Dungeon Master.
Yeah.
So how does that affect? How does your relationship with the DM affect the playing of the game and the outcome of the campaign?
So it depends on the DM. The better the DM is, the less it affects it. It makes it more fun a lot of times because people do stuff that I don't want them to do all the time, and I get super frustrated about and very begrudgingly let them do it.
Yeah.
And they think it's hilarious to see me get frustrated.
Yeah.
So I think it's better for the enjoyment of the table as long as the DM doesn't take it personally.
Doesn't take it personally. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna see if we can make trivia work with this rudimentary version of the spinning wheel here. So you'll see what I did for those of you that are home listening and not watching.
Oh, Warcraft.
What I did on
Did I say Warcraft?
Yeah, Warcraft.
See, we didn't even mention Warcraft because real-time strategy is not really related to any of this stuff at all.
So what I did is I took the standard wheel that we played on the first 2 or 3 weeks, and I eliminated some things that I felt like viewers and enjoyers of this genre would not like, and I left the kind of the genres that surround D&D, and I made Dungeons and Dragons D-20 type, a big one, and then I made Fallout.
Chrono Trigger. Warcraft. Okay.
All right. Okay. What race and made-up class was the character played by Mr. T in a 2009 commercial, which was subsequently added to World of Warcraft
and
as an NPC? Mr. T was in a very funny commercial.
It was great.
In 2009.
Man,
do I even need to write this down?
I know you know it. Yeah. Does anybody in the Discord know it? It's a great commercial, and it was an awesome fusion of what is this guy doing in a World of Warcraft commercial?
All right, what is it?
My name is Mr. T, and I'm a night elf mohawk.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
And it was after World of Warcraft was big, but it was still on its way up. So that's the Warcraft question.
Oh, I'm not.
I just really wanted to get.
All
right, night elf mohawk.
Night elf mohawk.
Yeah, man.
All right, moving right along. Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, all right. So what Dungeons and Dragons race created a long-standing, complicated legal landscape with the Tolkien estate? What Dungeons and Dragons? What did the Tolkien estate sue Wizards of the Coast over?
There's only 2.
I'm gonna guess elves.
Elves and Uruk-hai. Okay, both good guesses. The answer is halflings.
Oh,
okay. Apparently they were originally called hobbits in the TSC, back in the TSR, whatever it was.
Oh, okay.
Apparently they were originally called hobbits.
Huh.
Okay.
And when the game got big, Tolkien estate was like, can't just use hobbits in your thing. And they changed them to halflings, which actually in Lord of the Rings they also call them halflings.
Both,
sometimes I think it's like more like as a pejorative, but they use both names. But the Tolkien estate said you cannot use the word hobbits. We made that up. So.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Moving right along.
I thought I was going to
Fallout.
get
Fallout. All right. And these Fallout questions are easy, I think. Okay.
It always seems that way when you see the answers.
Yeah. The Great War in 2077 is the primary defining event of Fallout's alternative history, but its timeline actually diverged much earlier with the beginning of the Atom Punk Golden Age following what real-world event? So what real-world event caused the timeline to diverge? Where does the timeline diverge in the Fallout universe?
So if you don't even have a guess, you want me to just say it?
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's like roughly in the 1950s, 1960s. So I'm gonna say World War II.
When they split
World War II,
when
right?
they discovered the nuclear power
atom bomb. After that,
so it was World War II.
World War II.
The answer
The correct answer was World War II or Hiroshima or Hiroshima Nagasaki bombings or dropping the first atom bomb. That's when the timeline diverged.
So we both get that one.
Kind of.
Yeah, I think so. I think we'll give you both credit for that one.
Why don't you just ask a couple Fallouts and ask a couple D&Ds, and then we can
let's just do a couple.
And we end on one Chrono Trigger that I want.
Okay, Dungeons and Dragons. What was the first official Dungeons and Dragons PC game, which was released in 1988?
I'm gonna say, just for posterity, P of R.
P of R, Wizardry. It was Pool of Radiance.
Oh yes,
man.
Destroyed.
I didn't realize it was that old.
Yeah,
that's one of the Gold Box games.
I know, but like
must have been one of the first ones.
All right, what 9th level spell, which has appeared in every edition of Dungeons and Dragons,
9th level,
allows magic users to do pretty much anything they want?
I know it. Do you know it?
Two quick correct answers there. So that is Wish.
Dude, I can do
Wish
this all
is
day.
the correct answer.
Let's do 20 of these. Let's do however many you have. Let's do
All
it.
right. Well, I'm gonna hit you with a Fallout question.
Okay, that's fine too.
What weapon platform was first deployed by the U.S. Army in the Battle of Anchorage against Chinese invaders? What weapons platform was first deployed by the U.S. Army in the Battle of Anchorage against Chinese invaders? Power armor and powered armor suit. Those are both correct. Power armor is the correct answer. Powered armor is also acceptable. Dustin's making a little comeback here. All right.
If it's
Dungeons and Dragons,
if it's straight D&D questions, he could probably beat me.
What 1982 Steven Spielberg classic film begins with a group of teenagers playing Dungeons and Dragons?
1982
Steven Spielberg classic. I did not know this. I found it when I was looking for stuff about.
When
I was looking for stuff about.
I know that it harkens back to that in Stranger Things.
In Stranger Things, I was looking for Stranger Things, and I found basically they said Stranger Things is kind of a referencing this other.
Yeah, I mean, I have a guess. I have a straight guess.
I don't. Year
That's
even.
What I got.
E.T. is correct.
Yes, we both destroyed it. All right.
Yep. And unfortunately,
Steven Spielberg is that's the only way
I didn't realize E.T. was older than us.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. What town was the capital of the new California Republic and played an important role in the early Fallout games? Oh god,
it's in the TV show
before being obliterated by a nuke in 2282.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to remember.
What's the town from Fallout?
It's called
1.
New something, right?
No, it's actually not. The new California Republic is the capital.
I think I know it. Do you know it, Dustin? Or am I just saying it?
No, just say it.
Sandy Springs.
Shady Springs.
Oh god, I'm so
Shady
close.
Springs. Yep.
Oh, that's what I wrote. I just couldn't read it right.
Oh yeah, you just wrote Shady Springs. Yeah. You just couldn't read your own writing.
Yeah.
Okay, one more Dungeons and Dragons question that I have in my head, and I'm trying to remember it because it is acronym related, and it's a good one. The acronym.
THACO.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
To hit armor class 0.
Yes, that is it. How did you know that? That's what I was thinking of. Just because it's kind of
it's an acronym.
Well,
I actually meant to mention it earlier. That was one of the best things that has ever happened was getting rid of THACO.
THACO is a good acronym, and they got rid of it in 3.0 or 3.5.
Yeah,
right.
3.0.
Yeah, that is exactly what I was going to ask about.
I don't miss it. Fifth edition is.
I'm going to give Dustin credit for THACO for answering the question that I didn't even ask.
I don't know that I had an opportunity to get that point because I totally 100%.
You could have read his brain and also
look at the score. Dustin needed the point. So Eric takes trivia tonight by a score of 10-5, and it's about time to wrap this show up. Do you guys have any parting thoughts here?
I was going to mention about Baldur's Gate 3 and 5th edition. I always liked 3.5 edition because I liked how unbelievably complicated it was. And I didn't really get into 5th edition until Baldur's Gate 3, and it's like, holy crap, it's awesome. It's actually awesome.
It's the best thing that has ever happened to D&D. 5e is Final Fantasy 7 for Dungeons and Dragons.
I actually felt like 5e changing so much it made me mad because like I spent all this time learning Pathfinder. Mostly Pathfinder is what I learned. I was kind of mad about 5e, right? Yeah. But man, I love it. It's awesome, and it's simpler and maybe not more intuitive, but it's simpler and
it's absolutely more intuitive.
I like it a lot. It's really awesome. If you haven't played since 5e, you should pick up a 5e game or just pick up Baldur's Gate.
So I don't know that 5e is better for veteran players.
Maybe not.
To be perfectly honest, it just depends on what you want to do. It's way better for you get through the story with less problems because the rolls are a lot simpler and the DCs and all this are a lot easier. And there's like scaling difficulties. It's a lot better for getting through the story. If you want to get into in-depth character building, that's not for you. 5e is very cookie cutter. It's more like World of Warcraft where you're going to play a priest and you have this tree.
Right.
Rather than 3.5 and Pathfinder where you can build
billions of pages.
I'm building a dual-wielding wizard that uses an imp familiar that can shoot lightning bolts out of his tail.
You know, the other thing we didn't talk about is that's kind of relevant to this discussion, and especially for us because we're now 40 and grew up perfectly, at least 2 out of 3 of us perfectly normal, is we didn't even touch on the controversy in the 80s with the kind of the moral panic about Dungeons and Dragons is, going to make all of our kids worship the devil,
I think
kill
that was
each other or kill themselves.
That was, but I think when
there was movies about it, like there was a famous Tom Hanks movie about it where they were like investigating a crime that was caused by, whatever. And then they even like in like Stranger Things.
There's an Unsolved Mysteries episode that actually took place. The story is from Louisiana about a D&D raid party gone wrong that murdered some people.
And Stranger Things kind of references that in the latest season.
And that might have been before our time, though, maybe.
It was.
I think it was. That was in like the early 80s, like right when it was kind of like becoming mainstream. And then like by then, by the time even like Stranger Things in the mid to late 80s, it was like more normalized, but still like had some stigma. And then
the late 80s to 90s, there was a game that was getting popular called Vampire the Masquerade that took that over.
Yeah.
Well, now there's so many things so much worse that are now mainstream. This is like
system.
Totally right. Well, everything about the world right now is so much worse than Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons are like, oh, that's nothing. Now the world is like so much worse.
Well, even you want to go pretend like you're in a world that makes sense?
Yeah,
okay.
Right. How about you just go turn your TV on? You're going to see 1,000 times worse in 5 seconds than you would ever imagine in Dungeons and Dragons.
I think the whole culture agreeing that something is bad is like a thing of the past. Like even in the 90s, like they had, like you remember when the Da Vinci Code was going to make everybody go to hell? Like that was going to be like the thing. And then Harry Potter, literally Harry Potter. Like some people raised their kids, like they were like, oh, you can't expose them to Harry Potter. And I think it's like, okay, well, like they're either like video games or what.
Let's don't get into Golden Compass because it is.
Well, I just mean that it's another one of the...
It's kind of the anti-C.S. Lewis.
The thing about Golden Compass that Harry Potter does not do is Golden Compass directly attacks normal, modern, mainstream Christianity, and like Harry Potter it's totally irrelevant.
Right.
But the relevant thing is the entire world says this is bad.
Yeah, but Golden Compass, I liked Golden Compass, but it has some troubling issues in it for confusing kids who are religious kids, and Harry Potter does not.
Isn't it really like the author was like C.S. Lewis did the Chronicles of Narnia?
I don't know
to kind of sneak in the Christianity, the Judeo-Christian kind of heritage. So I'm gonna do this same fantasy series, but it's gonna be the opposite.
Yeah, I don't know about that part. I remember reading it and being like, the first book is like good, and the second book is like, oh my goodness, and the third book is like, wow, this is legitimately attacking my beliefs, But that doesn't need to go on the podcast necessarily.
Well, we turned out normal. Point being, like
I read it, but I read it when I was in my 20s.
You know what? The books are probably not what is going to make your kids go to hell. The video games are probably not going to make your kids go to hell. It's probably how you're raising the kids. You know, like I'm just saying. Like we turned out pretty normal. And look, I read the Da Vinci Code. I read Harry Potter. I didn't play Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s, you know, but I bet if we would have, well,
although Stellar Blade is basically. Have you seen Stellar Blade?
It's basically porn.
It's basically
a mainstream video game. That's
it's
just
full on mainstream porn. Yeah, I don't know that
my kids. I'm not
is it
gonna
a KRPG?
No, it's not. It's more like a hack and slash. It's not even an RPG. It's like a hack and slash. But it's like, man, dude, it's like it doesn't even pretend.
The moral panic for us is gonna come from Stellar Blade. Okay, so you know what? Let's call it a night. I think it's time to call it a night. We had some great conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a very informative episode. I hope our viewers love it. I hope our viewers enjoy all the insight you guys provided. It's time to move on. So we will be back next week. And thank you guys all for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for buying cars from Lake Charles Toyota. Thank you for coming to Sign Esports events. And as always, thank you for watching Sign Esports, the Founders Podcast.